This is the You Winning Life podcast, your number one source for mastering a positive existence. Each episode will be interviewing exceptional people, giving you empowering insights, and guiding you to extraordinary outcomes. Learn from specialists in the worlds of integrative and natural wellness, spirituality, psychology, and entrepreneurship, so you too can be winning life. Now, here's your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, certified neuro-emotional technique practitioner, and certified entrepreneur coach, Jason Wasser.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the You Winning Life podcast. But you already know that at this point, the title and how to reach out to us. But one thing I do want to ask is, if you are listening to the show, if you are benefiting from this, please reach out to me directly. I'd love to know what topics and what guests you have really enjoyed, what you're taking away from, how we can be more helpful to you specifically as the listeners and part of the community. I want to know who you are in our community. And one of the beautiful things is like having guests like today, like having Bobby here today, is allowing us to grow and develop even more. So Bobby, first of all, thank you for coming and spending some time with us.
Yeah, Jason, thanks for having me. I'm grateful for this opportunity.
Cool. So of the 1,000,001 things we can talk about in your world and all the things that you've achieved and are accomplishing and will continue to accomplish, but you're really focused on leadership and creating and helping people facilitate leadership one person at a time. And I think that there's a lot of misnomers or a lot of misbeliefs about what leadership is. And one of the things that I see consistently is that people who might even be employees or working in a system or believe that they don't have power, that they're just doing a job, that it's their 9 to 5 or whatever time that they're working, they go home, that they don't have influence and impact. And it leaves them very frustrated, dejected, lacking a mission, lacking a purpose. It's, they may have sacrificed purpose for paycheck. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to just hear, your thoughts and your personal definition of what leadership is. And maybe, just start off our conversation with just, that relevant perspective of starting there for the average, right? The average person is in that world, and hearing your thoughts on just, that mindset about what could evolve for them.
Sure. I'll start with one small anecdote, just to give the audience perspective. When I decided to write the book, the first place I went was Amazon. And I realized there were 60,000 titles on leadership. And I say that to say that there is no one style of leadership that's the greatest. It's usually an amalgamation. So let's talk about what leadership is and leadership isn't. So leadership at its core is action. Leadership is not a title. It's not being a manager. It's taking action. It's having a line of sight, or vision for your organization. But at the individual level, everyone is a leader, because first we have to lead ourselves. The best example I can give you on that is how people lead by examples, right? You could be a subject matter expert, with specialized knowledge, and people will gravitate to you. They'll see you as a leader, because specialized knowledge is action, and it gets you to the front of the line, every time. So leadership, again, at its core is action, and everyone has the opportunity to be a leader. You don't need a title to be a leader. Leading by example and doing the things you're supposed to do, and, displaying your character and your values, people will naturally see you as a leader.
So talking about the empowerment perspective, right? So someone's been working in a job, they're part of a big system, and they may be frustrated, disappointed, perhaps even, they check in, they check out. How can they reignite that? Like, I'm working with someone who's in a system, who's in a governmental based system, and they know that they've brought stuff to the powers that be about how they know they can improve and have impact. Not only them, but also the environment, the culture, the greater, the greater good for everybody around them, and they're not being listened to, and they're not being asked to help. In the space of leadership, obviously it takes someone who is a good leader to hear and acknowledge that someone else also wants to be in that space with them. But if someone doesn't have that opportunity, right, like in this situation, how can one start retaining and reclaiming that feeling of leadership, that feeling of empowerment, that feeling of lack of frustration? Because I'm finding that this is happening with a lot of people that I'm working with.
Mm-hmm.
And have that impact back.
Yeah, that can be very frustrating. I think we've all felt that at one time or another. Typically, when you go to a leader, manager, however you want to couch them, and you bring them a good idea or a great idea. A great idea always has a business end. So just say you bring them a great idea, and they're not listening. Well, number one, they probably don't trust themselves. They're probably a little selfish, right? And they might be a little bit intimidated. Mm-hmm. Right. They might see that individual as a threat. I think we've all, lived through that as well. What I've done in those situations is I had to reverse course and focus on myself, because what is the possibility of changing that person? Right. Not very high. Right. But what I can do is change myself or improve myself. So then I'll look at what are the standards of performance, right? Because every large organization has performance standards. So I would look at those performance standards and I would just try to blow them out of the water every chance I got. I'd make myself so strong that they had no choice but to listen. That's what I would recommend people do. If people are feeling that, okay, so let's not blame the leader first. Let's look within first, right? Do I have the right knowledge base, right? Am I showing up at work and not just physically showing up? Am I showing up Wednesday and Thursday, or am I showing up Monday through Friday, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say look inward first and make sure you examine yourself and make sure that you're doing everything absolutely necessary, right, to be seen as someone who others would want to listen to. Because influence is, it's easy and hard, right? It's easy in the fact that if you do the right things time after time, people will listen. It's hard because you really have to put those repetitions in intentionally, right? Not just pop up every 2 weeks and say, hey, I got this good idea. How about demonstrating that every day to where your peers recognize you? And once a group of your peers recognizes you, well, team leaders have to recognize you. Once team leaders recognize you, the word is out on you that, hey, this person has something to say. This person has something to contribute. So there are ways to engineer being heard, rather than just one-on-one. But again, I would go back to the individual and, examine your character, your values, how you're living those, how you collaborate. It could be a number of things, but that is an interesting question and a relevant question to large organizations, because people look for two things. They look for recognition and growth. It's proven, a lot of people leave companies, but money is usually never the number one factor. It's usually growth opportunity or recognition.
And I think hand in hand with that, with the growth and the recognition, goes impact. And I think that now in our generation of workers, for those who are, newer to the workforce system, let's say over the last 10, 15 years, I'm finding that impact is important. And mission, right? There's a mission, there's a desire, there's times where there's still people who are like, well, I fell into this job. It's very lucrative and wasn't what I originally want to do, but I'm making the best of it and it pays my bills and I'm, having a great lifestyle because of it. But I know when it comes to the idea of leadership, I see it as like the more that you have a buy-in to mission critical beliefs, assumptions, expectations, and outcomes, the more it can feel authentic. And the opposite of that is if you're just there because it's a paycheck, I get it, right? That may be your highest priority, right? The highest trait is like, I just need to have the lifestyle that I want. I'll do my stuff outside of work. I have no problem turning that part of me off at work to have that impact. I'd rather use that as leverage to have impact elsewhere. And this is the tool to get there, not the end all be all. So there's both of those lenses and not one is more right than the other, but I'm sure it's probably helpful for someone to realize what that motivation is for themselves.
Oh, for sure. There's an old saying, you either like the job or you like the paycheck. If you're lucky enough, you like both.
Yeah. So when you've
But
gone through, but I want to take that to your career.
Yeah, let's turn that last question around though about
Okay.
the person not being heard about from his leader or his or her leader. If I'm a leader and I set up a hiring team, which you usually do in the corporate space, and you've taken in 200 resumes and you whittled it down to 10, you had a few rounds of interviews and you hired this person. Well, that's a whole lot of energy to hire someone, onboard them, and have them sit there and not contribute, right? So what I'm trying to say is, as a leader, I want their best mind every day. I want to hear all the ideas. I don't care if they're left field. I can't tell you how many left field ideas that I heard or proposed, but there was one component. There was one component that fit in the overall scheme that helped. To me, there's no such thing as a bad idea or a left field idea. They're just ideas, right?
Yeah.
But leaders should strive to extract the best out of the people they're privileged to lead.
Well, makes sense.
Sorry, I just want to get that in there.
No, and I think that's such a, and I see this all the time in different circles of, even before I became a therapist and I was working in nonprofit worlds, and there was so much control from a board of directors or staff that have just been there and are just burnt out, and things are just kind of on life support, and you bring new ideas in and they're like, oh, well, we want someone with new ideas, and then when you try to implement them, they're like, what do you mean, why are you changing things? I remember when I was doing like my first internship, it was at a school, and I was definitely the most progressive style and personality of the therapist. And I know a bunch of the other people that work there, and it's a great school. And I was just so different than those that have just coming in from a very clinical mindset, because I don't believe clinical needs to be boring, dry, and hierarchical. And they got upset that I was playing box ball with the kids. And my whole thing is, how am I going to let them feel safe and comfortable with me if they don't see me being a normal person that they can relate to as an adult that has a very different role than anybody else in the school, and no one else in the school at that adult level is doing this with them, and you want them to trust me and feel comfortable coming to me? It was just so far out of their mindset that it was also one of the many reasons why I chose not to go back, and one of the reasons why they chose for me not to go back, because that system wasn't thinking outside of that box.
Yeah, it sounds like they saw themselves as being very omnipotent and prescriptive.
Yes.
Whereas your approach was to be approachable.
Right. Meet them where they're at.
Meet them where they're at. If you want to have a conversation and build rapport and build a relationship and you get your intended result, well, the first thing is to put on the face or the persona that you're approachable and behave that way, right? To build trust. I mean, trust is built through transaction too.
Exactly. So the idea of leadership and going through the different stages of your career, when you're just talking about approachable, there are certain industries, there are certain cultures that approachability isn't necessarily baked in to that. And I'm assuming some of your background is very applicable to that. So what were some of the challenges that you had working and figuring out what you wanted to do and how you wanted to skill and scale your unique talents? What were some of the challenges with that, and what were some of the things that you took away that helped you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, my lessons in approachability probably start with football and the Marine Corps and stuff like that, because you're kind of dealing with gruff people. Not that they don't have feelings and emotions, and not that they aren't compassionate, but it's an intense type of thing, right? But here's what I learned about those type of environments. Not everyone who is direct has bad intentions. And intention is the key word. What is the intention behind the way this person is communicating, right? To me, I love, direct feedback. And it probably comes from how I was raised with my parents, my father being World War II, Korean, Vietnam veteran, and my mom, her people were from Yugoslavia. Right. And, those are tough people. So, I had a lot of directness, growing up. So it just carried over to football in the Marine Corps, but that, was sort of another level. But I always look for the intent, right? If the intent was to improve me, well, hey, who cares? But if the intent was to denigrate or humiliate or something like that, then, I wasn't okay with that. And I wouldn't want to hang around, those spaces. But, I would say, how I built my leadership chops was, first the informal, training at home in the household, and then in the Marine Corps, learning leadership in a very structured way, and then going out into the world and, applying that and learning along the way. And, in the book, I have those leadership traits, and I added compassion and accountability, because I found out along the way that, the best leaders I ever had, the very, very strongest leaders I ever had were compassionate, right? They weren't bleeding hearts 24/7. That's not the point. The point was, at such a time that's appropriate, they were compassionate, right? And, that means a lot to people. And then, as a leader, accountability is everything. If you're privileged to lead people, everything is, if there's mistakes, it's on you, and if people do good, well, then give them the credit, but it's all sort of goes back to personal accountability.
Yeah. The one thing with accountability, and I'm seeing this especially with couples, right, and in relationship dynamics, is that, and you can see this in a business setting or any time where there's two people who are kind of trying to figure out or solve a problem, is the ownership and accountability of what they may not even have realized that we're bringing to the table. And one of the things I love, challenging and pushing back especially with my couples, is like what one spouse will say, or one partner will say, like, oh, well, but he's always that, or she's always that. I'm like, yeah, but when did you notice that? Well, I noticed it 6 months in. Okay. But then you went on the next date with them, and then you either proposed to them or you said yes to that proposal. In other words, you still willingly knew this and you went along with that the whole time. And now all of a sudden it's the big issue, right? So so why aren't you taking accountability and ownership for not identifying that or stepping away from that at that point? So the fact that we now as a universe, as a world, are always blaming things outside of us. Like, the context for me is like, you can either be empowered or you can be a victim, but you can't be both at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So going through that, like when we're talking about leadership and we're talking about empowerment, and really like the whole idea of book Lead You is this internal process. Walk us through some of that. Walk us through the idea of what that means, what we have available to us, what we don't even realize is there, and some of the tools and tactics to get there.
So just like companies have governance, right? And governance is the way people run a company, right? We have that same thing for ourselves, right? How we show up every day, how we wake up, how we go to work, how we do work, how we get along. That all starts with a process of knowing who we are, right? And life is in phases, right? So, college, early career, mid-career, late career, marriage, kids, there's all kinds of phases in there. And, at some point, wisdom starts to sink in, probably around about 43, 45.
Hopefully,
start getting
hopefully.
wisdom. Well, yeah, hopefully, we give people the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly.
In our shop,
Yeah.
But it starts with an honest conversation with yourself, because I say that the most important conversation you have as a leader is the one you have with yourself. Because if you're not truthful with yourself, you can't hope to be truthful with someone else. If you don't have self-trust and self-belief, it's impossible to believe in other people genuinely, right? You could say you do, but it's not so. So it's asking yourself, those series of questions. Where am I at? Where do I want to go? And how do I get there? And just being as honest as you can. The more honest you get, the more painful it gets. But the benefit and the dividend at the end is you have a truthful and actionable plan to follow. And, sort of, you can read in the book, that's what I did at, age 45. So I've been on an 8-year, improvement journey, and I've improved all parts of my life, faith, family, my financial status, and, my health, 53, and I've never been healthier, right? As numbers go, I probably could lose a few pounds, but, as far as the numbers go, I'm as healthy as a 25-year-old.
Incredible. Yeah. And that commitment, it does. It's a scary, the idea of being either risk adverse, or it really, right, is change adverse, or is it, this accountability and taking this insight and looking at ourselves, like, it doesn't have to be a harsh process. I know you said, right, it could feel really bad, and yes, it could, right? And this feeling bad doesn't have to be bad, right? And I know we're playing with the words a little bit,
Yeah.
but I know that there's a lot of, like, we're so overwhelmed today with
Yeah.
everything going on, and things are we're just barrage. We have this barrage of just data and information, and how do we sift through it? And obviously we have confirmation bias of only hearing and attracting things that are in alignment with our biases, but even just to have simplicity on the far side of complexity, to willingly say, I don't want these things in my life anymore. I don't want to be doing these things. I don't want to be participating with these things. I find a lot of people are just afraid, or the way I would say it is, you're more willing to treat yourself like an asshole than be afraid that by turning down a person's proposal to participate with something with them, or not going out with them, or not going to the bar with them, or not going to an event with them, or not spending time with them, that you're afraid they're going to think you are one. And you're more
Yeah.
likely to treat yourself like crap, so you don't think that someone else thinks that you're treating them like crap.
Here's my counsel on that. We all have goals, right? And I'll correlate this to how I work with my children. They're 23 and 26, and they both have big goals. And my counsel is, ask yourself, every time you're with someone or go to do something or think about a purchase or what have you, is this getting me closer to my goal or further than my goal? And if it's not getting you closer to your goal, truly, genuinely, well, then why do you need it? And then that's just a simple, like, first pass, right?
Right.
And then you ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? Right.
With it or
That's a
without it.
powerful question.
Yeah. With it or
Yes,
without it. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, two easy things.
But then I hear all the voices in my head of, like, well, I can start tomorrow, or I can rebudget next week, and it's really not going to be that much, right? We all have those justifications to stay stuck. And our brain, for those of you who like the neurology side of stuff, those of you that are listening, right, our brains are four times as likely to focus on a negative outcome than a positive outcome. So that negative outcome could be the self risks that you unconsciously believe about why making the same decision that keeps you stuck would actually be a better decision than doing something different.
Yeah. Well, I always like to go back to the Kubler-Ross curve. It was adapted at some point for business, and, it's in the change management space. But, the gist is, when there's an event, it starts with shock, and then denial, and then bargaining, and then exploration, possibilities, and then acceptance. And I always coach to go straight to the possibilities. But that takes, a little bit of resilience,
Right.
and it takes a little bit of unselfishness, to get away, because people love to stay stuck in the bargaining phase, right? They're not in, they're not out. They feel good about themselves because they're not in denial anymore. They just won't take that step to see the possibilities. And I constructively nudge them always to look at the possibilities.
How does someone in this lens realize that the possibilities they have, like, in other words, there are times where I talk to people, and we talked a little bit about this in our pre-conversation, of, like, realizing that what they're hoping for is really just an action step, but what they're calling it a goal. And they shortchange themselves, they minimize the possibilities for themselves, or they even diminish, or can't even start to think about what the positive attributes or advantages are to doing something different. How would you walk someone through that by challenging their assumptions, or by hearing what they're saying to you, is realizing that, oh, they're playing way too small on this?
So imagine a mountain, just say Everest or K2, and the big goal is on top of the mountain. Normally, these people will look at the top of the mountain all day, instead of breaking it down into, say, 10 incremental goals, and then taking the first step for that small goal, right? So there's the vision of success, but guess what? There are a series of wickets to get through first. Focus on the small to get the big. And I'm simplifying, but that, when I examine the things that I've gone after in my life, that's how I was successful. And when I've had failures, I usually look to the top of the mountain too much, right? Because I've had successes and failures. I've had them all, but I've learned through every one. So that's the coaching I would give folks, is to break down these big goals into smaller goals, and don't let the top of the mountain overwhelm you every day.
Yeah.
Put one foot in front of the other. It goes back to some of these, old adages. Put one foot in front of the other and keep moving. Probably the number one thing I learned, through growing up in the Marine Corps is keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't stop. Keep moving.
Momentum. It's building momentum.
And here's the thing. Another riff on this is the road is long, and folks have no concept today of delayed gratification. And it's hard, like a man at 53, I know all about it now. When I think back to my younger self, it was trusting the unknown. And I think people are looking into the abyss, and that might never come. Well, you never know if you don't try.
Yeah.
But yet again, take the first step and keep moving.
I also see it as like, I'm about to, so I as a good example, personal example, I stopped playing violin around 5th or 6th grade. So, and I just got re-inspired to pick it up, and I'm now 40, and I'm now 45. So that's a long time. And of course, I see people playing, and I'm like, oh, like I would love to just, Dave Matthews Band, or any of these bands. Right. Well, they no longer have their violinist for ethical reasons. And but like, that type of, I want to, like, I could have done that, and I could do that, right? And whatever it is. But then I pick up the violin for the first time, and I'm like, oh God, this sucks. And there's that,
because it's
hard, and I'm not at that level, and I never really was at that level, even when I was in 6th grade, even though I was at a decent level for a 5th or 6th grader, but I wasn't at an amazing level for a 5th or 6th grader. So the level of impatience that I might have, knowing where as an adult I'm able to pick up certain things easily, but it doesn't necessarily make me a master of the craft like the people who I know are doing it, that I want to emulate it. And it's slowing down. One of my mentors quotes this all the time: you have to slow down to go fast.
No, 100%. 100%.
And I think when people try to set that big goal of climbing the mountain, that it's like, okay, well, you can't even if you had all the tools and you had the perfect weather day, doesn't mean your lungs are conditioned to that altitude. Even though you could have just ran a marathon, and that's far longer of a distance than climbing up Mount Kilimanjaro.
Oh yeah, it
doesn't mean
right.
It doesn't.
It's mean like a 40-day journey.
Crazy.
I want to climb K2, so I've researched it.
Oh,
right?
so
yeah, and it's like a 40 to 50-day journey.
Yeah,
of getting there, and getting outfitted, and acclimatizing, right? Because we're talking like 24,000 feet, above sea level,
and each one of those stages is in and of itself a goal that majority of people will never reach, even in the first place. To just even start brainstorming and researching it, to start identifying those things, is already putting someone in that mindset. Okay, like you said, okay, so what's the next step, and what's the next step? And here's another perspective: people talk about getting up the mountain, but they don't talk about getting back down the mountain, and what's on the other side of that for them. And we don't take that into consideration of well. And I think that's one of the questions that I like asking is, if you were successful with what you want to achieve, what's going to have to change on the other side of that?
Oh,
who's going to have to change? Who in your life is going to have to be different? What else is going to have to be different if you do achieve this? And that sometimes is the limiting. It's not the goal. It's what has to come along with the goal.
That's just great perspective, because I've been to the top a couple of times in my life and seen a lot of people get to the top, and it's a far drop down. But I would say that along the way, the struggles and the setbacks were so to saying, it's not about the journey, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey and about the ride. And I've come to believe that's true, because I look back at all my struggles and setbacks and all the pitfalls along the way, and it's where I learned the most. And it's where I learned the most about myself. When I started to see failure as a signal to rearm and to learn from, right? And not to have poopy pants and, oh, woe is me. You know, when you learn to flip that, it's powerful.
Yeah.
It's, you know, a lot of people say mindset. I kind of use the language of psychological tool set, right? Because, you know, we have compartmentalization and, you know, different things, emotional regulation. And, you know, I teach a little success pattern, you know, sort of like I have in the book, but it's in my coaching practice. And, you know, people love that because it opens their mind to the possibilities that the mind is strong and the mind is a tool to help you accomplish your goals, right?
Yeah.
You know, getting past those limiting beliefs and limiting identities and so on and so forth. And all, you know, most people, all they need is just a little bit of an encouragement. You know, some people are just so brash and confident. Look, I'm going to go do this. Okay. You're behind me. Great. If you're not, I don't care. There's another group behind them though, that just need a little bit of encouragement, you know, and that's the fun and awesome thing about leadership is building a rapport with people and learning what makes them tick personally and professionally.
Yeah. And I love calling that. I call that for my clients. I call that, I want to help you build your dream team, because I'm not the end all be all. And I'm not an expert in everything. I'm an expert in what I know, but I'm not an expert, but I might be really good at helping you find that expert who can help you build that team. And I think, you know, when you're talking about the different traits, of the character building traits, and one of the things you have here is in the circle, from loyalty, dependability, judgment, initiative, you have bearing. And you have an image of a kind of like a castle with two side walls. And I think that's such an important trait of like, who is helping you get there? Who are you asking and looking for to help support you in that process? But I'm wondering, what was your intention of that? Because bearing, right? What is your bearing? What's your direction? And what was your intention with that?
Yeah, there's a couple of different meanings for bearing. You know, bearing could be a coordinate, right? But in the context of Marine Corps leadership, bearing is, you know, not getting emotionally hijacked, right? So if you're in a heated conversation and you stay calm and cool, you know, in the Marine Corps, that would be, okay, this person kept their bearing, right? And staying, you know, someone who can really emotionally regulate themselves.
Yeah.
On the other side of that, yeah, you know, bearing could, you know, could signify what values you have, right? So you wouldn't sail the ocean without coordinates, would you?
Right.
So why would you live your life without any values? And it's funny, you know, because some of the people I work with, I say, okay, we're going to do a little exercise, and then we're going to write down your core values. And I'll say, give them a piece of paper and a pen and say, okay, let's go ahead and write them down, your 3 to 5 core values. And after about, you know, 15 seconds, it's okay, you know, pens down, and who has 5, you know, poll for hands. You'd be surprised that a lot of folks don't have any. Some can only write 1 or 2. Some don't know what it means. And it's pretty astounding. And even explaining to people and providing anecdotes of what values mean is powerful for people. Because if you can pick 3 to 5 core values based upon your phase in life, you know, you can win. You know, if you're young, ambition might be a core value. You know, there might be some that you carry along the way, like hard work and family. You know, I've carried those throughout my whole life. You know, respect. You know, respect should be through every phase of life, right? Because it's the end all be all of everything. You know, do I show self-respect, right? Usually, if you find a person who respects others, you find they have great self-respect. The inverse is also true. If you see someone who goes around not respecting people, if you examine them close enough, you know, they really don't have a lot of self-respect. You know, so it's really people's behavior amplify, you know, I'm probably, you know, speaking to the choir here, but, you know, people's behavior amplify, you know, what's going on internally.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm such a big fan of the core values and values-based decision making. And anybody who's been listening to the podcast since early on knows that, like, I am obsessive about that topic. And I even do this with my couples. And, you know, it's kind of like that old-fashioned, like, family crest, family shield. Right? That's what core values are. Like, what is your personal brand that you're putting out to the world internally and externally? And a lot of people don't have that. And when you brought up that idea of like, well, you wouldn't get in a boat and, just see where the water takes you, we drift aimlessly and our life will be chaotic and choppy, and we're going to go into, tsunami type waves. But we have to take ownership that we brought that upon ourselves by the lack of clarity of discerning our core values at front. One of my coaches, and when I really got into the entrepreneurship world, and then seeing how much psychology and personal development is invested in being an entrepreneurial, whether you're an entrepreneur and you're working for someone else or inside a system, or an entrepreneur and you have your own company, it's still about this. It's still about that at a mission critical level. And why I see, even when I'm working with other therapists or I'm working with people on their businesses, it's that they don't have a clear sense of what their core values are. They might say, well, I like seeing this type of client and that type of client. I'm like, okay, but what makes you different? Oh, well, I'll call them back quicker. Okay, well, no, that's not a deciding fact. I mean, that might help with a sale tactic, but what's going to keep them and help them? And it's very difficult for people from all industries to really get to that level of that discernment of, this is the core values of my practice. This is the core values of my business. And the companies that do that are polarizing like that, even if I disagree with them, means that there's still 50% of the world out there who do, at least.
Yes. Yeah.
And you don't need 100% of the world to keep your business afloat.
Of course not.
I have 8 billion people in the world.
Of course. No, it's a beautiful thing when you can educate people and give them antidotes, and you kind of see the light go off, and then to see them actually start living the values and realizing that, yes, there's 8 billion people, but I can differentiate myself just by choosing some of these core values and making my, actions, choices, and decisions based off those, and stay sovereign to that. Because there's some values that you stay sovereign no matter what. Like for me, it's respect and hard work. I've had a lot of challenging times in my life, and when I look back through it, I just always worked hard.
Yeah.
And just working hard, it brought me through it, right? And working hard and keep going. There's always the other side of something, right? Terrible things usually, not going to last forever. So just keep moving. Just like realizing a goal, or it's on the other side of that hill. You just need a little bit of courage to get up that hill and get over it.
No one walks out of the gym the first time with a 6-pack.
Well, wrote about it in the book. You don't get the 500-pound squat in week 1.
Right.
Leadership and building your mind and stuff like that. It's the same thing. I mean, I've been on a focused personal improvement journey for 8 years now, and I'm still not where I want to be. I'm in a good place, but there's more to get.
Yeah.
Right. It takes time.
Well, that's that whole good to great from Jim Collins, right? And it's, a lot of people don't even realize that they're at good. And if you don't acknowledge that you're at good, or what you need to get to good, you can't get to great. And a lot of people also don't know what like great even looks like for them. And that's where, those of us like you and I and other people in our spaces are helping people get there. But it's also one of the things that we can't do it alone. We do need that. One of the things I always promise my clients is I'm going to be the side view mirror and sometimes a rear view mirror, but I'm also sometimes need to be your high beams. Because we're usually going through life making decisions on what shows up in front of us. Again, going back to that aimless, unclear core values. And even with my couples, right? Like when I have my couples sit down and write, what are their individual core values and what is the core values of the relationship / family? And then now, what are you guys doing? What have you been doing that align with those core values? And what have you been doing that don't align with those core values? We know which ones to get rid of, and we know which people to get rid of. We know which activities to get rid of, and we know which ones to amplify. It's going to make things a lot easier, but it also is a broadcast signal to the world of who you want to join you, who you're going to let into your house, who you're going to let into, who you're going to hang out with, who you're not going to hang out with. And people aren't going to like that necessarily. But again, you want to attract your tribe. I know there's a great book, Patrick Gentempo, and his book is called Your Stand is Your Brand. Mm-hmm. And it's really like, it is putting it out there. This is what we believe. This is what we're looking to accomplish. Do you want to be part of that mission?
Well, life and business is not about pleasing everybody.
Say that again, please.
Life and business is not about pleasing everyone. It's not. You know, if you have core values and you live them, guess what? You're probably going to lose some business opportunities. You might lose people you thought were friends, but it's addition by subtraction, man.
Yeah. And a lot
It
of
is.
people will decide that. I have a referral that yesterday that someone said, I'm the person for them to help them. And they call me and I'm absolutely not the person to help them, but they've already been convinced because they've gone to so many different people that no one else has helped them. But now because of their perspective, I'm just going to be another person on that list who doesn't help them. It's not, there was no wiggle room in that because they're so, and of course that feels awful for me because I know this person is struggling, but it's so beyond my, my level of security clearance, and it's so beyond my level of skill set that I can provide some insights, but I'm not gonna I'm like, hey, listen, you should look at this, this, and this, but here's who you need to see. I'm not rejecting you. I want you to take this as not rejecting you. This is just, I can't be good for you. I don't want to be on the list of another person who disappointed you. Right. So I think there's a lot of that fear, and that took developmental stages of me to turn down clients. And I actually am more likely to turn someone down than I am to say yes at this point.
Saying no is powerful, and it's good. Sometimes it's the best answer. It may not feel good, but again, that's why it's called business, right? You're not going to, in leadership, you're not going to feel good all the time. It's not the point.
Yeah.
Now the point is to accomplish the mission. And for you, your practice is built on your knowledge and so on and so forth. And if you can't help this person, well, the right thing to say is no.
Also ethical and moral, right? To do
that. Yeah, of course.
And we have so many people out there, and this from your world, of how many people have opened up a business and they're guiding or consulting and coaching, and they just take everybody because they're not at that, they haven't figured that out yet, that's not actually doing anybody any good, including themselves.
Yeah, I would see that as a disaster.
Yeah. So walk us through as we get close to wrapping up, walk us through a little bit more about the book, but also talk us a little bit about the Stronger You coaching program.
Yeah. So, the book, I knew I was going to retire a few years back, but didn't know when. And, I said to myself, how can I give back? And, leadership's one thing that bubbled to the surface because I've been leading teams, since high school in the military and stuff like that. And, I looked at Amazon and, there's 60,000 titles of leadership. So I wanted to write something different. And I had a theory of doing a few books. So the first one is Lead You, the winning combination to achieve personal and professional success. And it's about, at a core, having that conversation with yourself, making that course of action, and then really examining, leadership traits, characteristics, examining values, learning about what self-trust and self-belief are and how self-trust precedes self-belief, right? Because if I don't trust myself, how can I believe in myself? What would I be believing in if, I didn't develop some trust? And, I'll go back to Stephen Covey's definition of trust as character and competence. Do I have good character? And am I competent at what I'm doing? I can trust myself, then I can believe. And, I talk about discipline and commitment, and I have a chapter in there on perfect, chapter 10, and it kind of gives the reader permission to say, hey, I don't need to be perfect. Sometimes good is good enough. But at the same time, in things that matter, we should always pursue excellence, right? We should always pursue excellence. And even have a chapter on self-care, which is something that took me decades to learn, that I needed. And I really didn't start performing self-care until I was about 45. But when I went from sleeping 2 to 5 hours for decades to sleeping 6 to 7 to 8, I'm telling you, sleep, totally changed my life. Yeah. And, there were things that, I had to engineer out of my mental headspace, obviously to, start getting that sleep. But again, going back to, that conversation and course of action, systematically working on things. And then it rounds out with, the leader's journey is long. It's the hero's journey, departure, fulfillment, return, and, life. Every culture has a story of that, right? So I think people should, sort of study that. But I end the book, with 6 questions that people should ask themselves if they truly want to be a leader. What values are non-negotiable, no matter the circumstances? Am I going to have the grit to make dislike decisions today? Because it's possible. Am I willing to embrace self-awareness and the demands of self-leadership? Am I willing to take accountability for my actions and decisions? And am I willing to struggle for self-improvement? Because there are some things you can improve fast. Sometimes the greatest gain is in that last 5 to 10% of things when it really gets hard. And that's, where struggle is good. And, lastly, are you willing to build and protect trust, with yourself and others? Right. Protecting your self-trust, means a lot. That means doing what you say you're going to do. Sometimes people, and I've, fell prey to this, like during the course of the day, I want to do 20 things and maybe I overcommit. Right. And then I didn't get those accomplished, that erodes my self-trust.
Sure.
So, you have to gear down and, okay, maybe I want to do 1 to 3 things very good today and not in 10, and let's not overcommit, and it comes from good heartedness, but it's a recipe for disaster.
Sure. I'm sure a lot of people can
And
relate to that last part specifically. Yeah.
Sure. And so that's the book. And then the Stronger You coaching program is, directed at CEOs, executives, and business owners. And, we assess them to see where they are and where they want to be. And, what's unique about our program is we have a 4-day retreat, during the year. It's a 12-month program. And we go out to the ranch in Kerrville, Texas for 4 or 5 days, and we mastermind and talk about leadership. We have a lot of adventure, and, that's where the magic happens. And, people find another part of themselves. Right.
It's all these experiential opportunities is so powerful, because it's obviously you and I get to have conversations with so many wonderful people, our clients, our friends, right, colleagues, whatever it might be. But doing something experientially is a whole different ballgame. Where you're getting yourself out of the situation, you're getting yourself out of the day-to-day. You really are, especially if you're on a ranch and you're in nature and you're doing all those other things. And as a good example, I have an accountability group that I've been in through a business program, and we're the only group that I know of in this of all the accountability groups that not only went from doing our 1 call a week, but we went to when I joined the group, I eventually pushed for them to go to doing one above and beyond the 1 hour a week. Is every quarter we do a 4-hour. And then after we did that for a few quarters, I pushed them to doing a weekend retreat in person, because we're not seeing each other. They're in different parts of the country. And then especially during the pandemic, when they weren't doing the twice a year deep dives through the organization, I wanted to recreate that. And it was obviously great to see them every week on Zoom, but I pushed for us to do a retreat on, to do an in-person, and I helped with a curriculum. I came up with a curriculum and everything like that, which I love doing with other people in other business as well, but I did it for us. And so we did that for 2 years. And now this year we're actually we just booked it all the other day. We're doing a 5-day cruise.
Yeah. Awesome.
And we're going to do everything we did on the cruise, but we also went for like more simple, so we don't have to cook. We don't have to worry about picking up groceries. We don't have to worry about anything, just showing up with what we need for ourselves. And it was worth the extra little bit of, right. But everything is, and it's just like, that's even more simplicity, but it's moving the ball further along, and it's experiential. And we're getting really, really out of our comfort zones and really into a different
that's great.
level of playing.
That's great. That's where the growth is.
That's where the growth is.
That's where
and
the
it started off
happens.
with 1 hour a week, right? And we still have the 1 hour a week, but I think that's like where what you and I are uniquely trying to is those things can happen for us in ways that we never thought. And by the way, it's also a full 100% tax write-off, because it's our retreat.
Sure.
So, that's that whole thing. So when people are they're finding the book, they're going to where are they going to find you to find the coaching program? How do they reach out to you? How do they connect with you?
I'm primarily on LinkedIn. Yeah. Just search for Bobby Harrington.
Beautiful. And then the coaching program is there. Through that, they can get you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So everybody out there, right? So even if you're not thinking and you're hearing this and you're, am I a leader? Am I not a leader? You do yourself a favor. Treat yourself to Bobby's book. Go online, Go treat yourself to that. And just do it anyway. Push yourself to a place of uncomfort, right? Again, like we said, you don't need to be in that if you're working for somewhere else. If you're a teacher in a school, if you're working at a job, if you're working, whatever, right? Where you're not an employee of yourself, you're not self-employed and you're not running a business, doesn't mean you're not a leader. And doesn't mean you don't have leadership capabilities. Or if you've ever like, yeah, I don't see myself this way. I want to challenge you, Bobby, and I want to challenge you to start seeing yourself differently, because that's where the magic starts to happen. And one of the things that you said when you were talking about the possibilities and the capabilities that people don't have, I like the idea of like, how does someone become a force to be reckoned with? And I think that the way that you go through these steps in the book, the essentials, the self-leadership traits of character building and the 8 essential leadership traits, I see that from my context, and feel free to borrow that, is people can become a force to be reckoned with. And I think who doesn't
100%.
want that? Who doesn't want that?
When think about it, you have power over yourself to do these things. You don't need anyone's help to do it. There are things that you can wake up and do every day and work on that make you that force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So if you know someone out there who's listening to this, and if you're listening to this and you know someone who you know would benefit from this episode, please do share. And if you haven't yet left a review for us, specifically on Apple, on iTunes, and so more people can find us, we'd appreciate that as well. And Bobby, once again, thank you so much. First, congrats on everything that you are doing, have done, and will continue to do. I can't wait to hear the next book. And when the next book comes out, where you're please come out and let's talk more about that next stage. So therefore, I'm challenging everybody. Listen to more of what Bobby has to say. Listen to more of this, right? This internal leadership that starts with us. And so when Bobby comes back, you guys know where to take the next step and the next level too.
Thank you, Jason. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the You Winning Life podcast. If you are ready to minimize your personal and professional struggles and maximize your potential, we would love it if you subscribed so you don't miss an episode. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Jason Wasser, LMFT.